Greetings from Finland and a warm welcome to today's webinar, What's in Your Resilience Backpack? Essential Tools for Coping with Life's Challenges. I'm Tiina Hoffman from Firstbeat and I'm here with my guest Kate Fismer. Kate's the founder of Revolution Resilience, a speaker, a resilience geek, and a longtime Firstbeat partner and coach. She was a guest speaker at our HRV Summit in London several years ago. And this summer we bumped into each other at a conference in London, and after that got the idea of doing a webinar together. Today's content is valuable whether you are here listening as an individual wanting to improve your resilience or as a coach looking to add some tools and approaches to your own service. Before we actually start, I'm going to ask Kate a question. I have an idea that you or your team first sort of invented or officially used the term green moments that many of us now use to talk about recovery during the daytime. What do you think? Are you actually the inventor of this concept?
That's such an amazing question. Do you know, I've never considered myself to be the inventor, but it's just something that if I am, I'm incredibly grateful for having had the chance. I think seeing so many of the recovery moments in people's data and then really hearing the story of what might be giving those recovery moments has been such an inspiration. It's just stayed with me. And yeah, it's amazing how many people I work with now that talk about green moments. And if you guys use that now too, I'm honored, I have to say.
I do think that was somehow the name of your presentation in London, and it has just stuck with us ever since then. So if any of you are new and you don't really yet know what that means, so you're going to become familiar with that as we get going here. But the webinar today is going to last 45 minutes, and I'm going to give it to Kate in just a few minutes after a short introduction. You can write questions in the Q&A box, and then we will answer them at the end of the session. And we are also recording this so that if you have to leave early or something, then you can access the recording later on. Just a very, very short introduction to Firstbeat, because we do have some new listeners. So we have done about 20 years of sort of pioneering work in the area of heart rate variability, analytics and coaching. And we are based in Finland. And today we have over 1,000 elite sports teams that are using Firstbeat solutions and over 1,000 Firstbeat Life partners who use our method as part of their own service offering. And our aim is to improve the well-being and performance of individual athletes and teams and regular working age people. And the Firstbeat Life platform, that we are not going to be directly talking about that, but we are going to be showing some examples from that. So what it is a personal measurement device, Bodyguard 3, that measures every heartbeat very accurately during day and night. It also measures movement. Then in addition to that, it includes a Firstbeat Life mobile app that the client always gets their result into the app when they end a measurement. And it gives them results and numbers and indexes about stress, recovery, sleep, exercise, fitness level, body's resources, those kinds of things. And then because Firstbeat Life is mainly a coaching tool, so it's designed to be used by professionals with their clients. So the coach has access to the client's measurement data and results via this admin portal that we have. They can have coaching discussions and they can start and manage their projects there. And if you're working with groups, it also allows you to create anonymized group reports and manage sort of your whole groups in that admin portal. So in that way, it's quite different from sort of a typical wearable device. And also an example of what sort of a typical 24-hour Firstbeat graph might look like. This is maybe not the result that people would like to have, but it quite often looks like this. The red color means stress, activation, energy. It's a very normal part of life. It means both positive and negative stress. It is quite okay. I'm sure Kate and I have pretty good levels of stress right now because for the past 10 minutes, we were struggling to get online to this darn Zoom platform. So we are probably right about here right now. But really the key of this kind of data is to see if there is recovery, which is the green color. It means that the parasympathetic nervous system is dominant, heart rate is low, heart rate variability is elevated. And the idea of discussions with coaches is to see what this balance is like and help the client see what might be their challenge areas and what might be things that are maybe going well for them. And I think this will be a good bridge when Kate starts in a few moments to talk about resilience, because clearly we need resilience to be able to maybe occasionally endure like days like this, but make sure we are not there all the time. And one more finding before I give to Kate. So a highlight from our big data. We have a large database with tens of thousands of measurements, and we find interesting population level trends from that. And I thought this one was kind of relevant to today's topic because it's looking at the amount of recovery and sleep duration across the year, so from January through December. And this is a trend that we have seen year after year in quite a similar form, in that in the summer months, people sleep shorter time, perhaps because they are on holiday, the days are long, there is a lot of daylight, but they get pretty good recovery, which is the green bar here. So physiological measured recovery. But the end of the year, which we are now heading into, really kind of puts our resilience to test, because even if we tend to, on average, sleep longer, perhaps because it's getting darker and colder and our tendency is to spend more time in bed, but somehow recovery is not as good as it is the rest of the year. You can see that the green bars are lower and there is a smaller percentage of that physiological recovery as part of the day. And it may have to do with year-end pressures, holiday stress, holiday hurry, holiday parties, maybe trying to get everything done before the year is over, maybe just the dark days. But I think resilience is going to be a good topic for today, because we would like to reverse this trend and try to build our resilience during these tougher months. And one more thing before going to Kate, I'm going to have a quick poll. So there's 2 questions for you to answer, just so we have a little bit of an idea of who we have online. So first one, just have you done a Firstbeat measurement on yourself before? Either lifestyle assessment or Firstbeat Life, just to give us a little bit of an idea of how familiar you are with this. All right, lots of answers coming in. Almost everybody online has answered. Looks like we are actually fairly closely tied. We have close to about 59% of people have done a Firstbeat measurement, so know what we are talking about, but over 40% have not. So that's good to keep in mind, that this is not something that everybody is completely familiar with. And then I have one more poll question that came from Kate, and this is something that she's going to then be talking about. She has some research on this area. But the question is, are you here? No, this is not the right question. Sorry, what happened to my poll? My poll question had to do with, somehow the Zoom has...
This is still an interesting question as well, though.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to, the question was supposed to be, do you speak to yourself in the same way as you do to a friend who is struggling? And I'm not going to create a new poll right now, but maybe you can address what your statistics on that, and then people can sort of compare their own answer. But the idea was about self-compassion. Do you speak to yourself in the same way as you would to a friend who is struggling? But I think at this, Kate, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and really, really happy to have you here with us today. And I'm sure we're going to be hearing some interesting examples and cases from your experience. And for the listeners, feel free to write questions in the Q&A. I'll keep an eye on that, and then we'll get back to them at the end of the session. Go for it, Kate.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely delighted to have been invited. I think that I've probably been a Firstbeat Life partner probably for about 10 years. So I have actually had the chance to see a lot of my own data and lots of other people's data. And I'd say, looking at that question that you just asked about, are you here individually or are you here because you're coaching people? I think it's sort of one and the same thing. I know that it's been a useful tool for me personally, and I know it's also been a really useful tool for my clients. So it's brilliant whether you're using it for yourself or whether you're using it with clients and for yourself. It's a really fabulous tool. And I wasn't going to start here, but maybe I will, because I think one of the things for me that was, I would say, life-changing probably about using Firstbeat Life when I first started was really starting to understand my sleep. And actually, interestingly enough, I've just completed another measurement period, and I have typically not the greatest sleep. I was looking at Tiina's slides and thinking, gosh, I wish I got that kind of recovery in the summer or any time in the year. So that's something that I really have focused with, both for myself and also for clients. And one of the insights that I gained from my last measurement period, which was just over the weekend, is actually using white noise. So I don't know if anybody has used white noise before, but you can get plenty of different tracks. And for me, the one that seemed to have really worked was listening to raindrops. And I woke up in the middle of the night, put my white noise raindrops on, and I clearly got much better recovery for the second half of that night's sleep while I was listening to that white noise. So that was my top tip, hot off the press from this weekend, is for any of your clients that might struggle with sleep, which is me, I include myself in that category, it could be really useful to start to look at things like white noise and listen to those in headphones. I've certainly got a couple of clients that have really benefited from things like meditation apps to listen to when they go to sleep as well. So anyway, back to what we're talking about today, which is thinking of our resilience backpacks. So this idea that often life is a journey, and it has all sorts of challenges sometimes. Something that we know that connects every single person on this Zoom call and every single person in the country that you're from, and basically everybody in the world, is that we're all going to experience challenging times. But I actually really like to think of resilience as being something that's part of daily life. So there are all sorts of things that we have in daily life that can be really valuable things to think about that support our resilience. So from that question, something that I'm going to start off by asking you to reflect on is what's something that supports your resilience. So if you're thinking about that question and thinking about your own resilience, what's the first thing that comes to mind that you know that's important and supports your resilience? And why might it be useful to think about that? So I don't know what your experience is when you start to think about resilience, or what your client's experience is. Certainly one of the things that I found in discussing this topic with people and working with lots and lots of people over the last 14 years is that we can often start to think about straight away the moments where we think we weren't resilient, or the things that we're not doing to support our resilience. So something that can be really valuable to start with is starting to think about what's already there. Because what we're doing is we're starting to resource people. We're starting to make people understand that there are things that are supporting them already. And that can start to help people actually feel better about their resilience already. So what's one thing that's supporting your resilience? What we know in terms of the research and the evidence of resilience is that there are many, many different things. So I think of resilience as being this whole of life thing rather than just one thing. We're not just born with it as a trait. You don't only have so much resilience. There are all sorts of things that support it in all aspects of our life. So this is what we call 6 different evidence-based areas. And that could be all sorts of things from, what do we do for our diet? Do we do exercise? What sort of things do we do to organize our time? Do we create routines that help us? So interestingly, one of the things that I saw in lockdown was how much sometimes having some regular routines can really be supportive for people. So I had one client when he was wearing his heart monitor, and what he noticed was he was getting a recovery moment when he makes his cup of tea every day at 11 o'clock. So it was almost as if his body knew, okay, it's 11 o'clock. This is time that we have some recovery. So maybe we can even start to train our nervous systems to recognize moments or, routines that, this is a potential moment for some recovery. It could be really useful and valuable. Now, we can't discuss, unfortunately, all of these topics today because we could actually spend a whole week thinking about these different areas. But what I would suggest is that it could be really useful to think about these things for ourselves, but also to work with something like this with our clients, or if we're designing programs and working with teams, starting to get teams to think about these different areas and start to think about what are things in these areas that already support their resilience, as well as things that they might be able to do to top themselves up. So as I said, resilience is a whole of life thing. It's not just one thing. So we're going to look at just a few things today, because obviously we haven't got lots and lots of time. But these are some of the things that I have found personally are really important for people. One of them we've already started. So I would say that a super powerful resilience is actually reflection. So it's taking time to think about these things. That's one of the reasons why the Firstbeat Life tool is so valuable, because people aren't just seeing data, they're actually really reflecting on things. So helping people take time to reflect and to ask questions and to think about the things that are supporting them are really useful. We're also going to look at a few short reflection exercises that we might be able to use as well. But often, and I do this as a job, this is my life, and even I still, when I get stressed, often forget about things. So taking that time to think about, what do I notice and what do I need, can be really useful, because we can often forget that. We're going to look at, obviously, some recovery and regulation. That's such an important thing that we learn from looking at things like Firstbeat Life. It's just that we're not built to just carry on using energy and not recover. We really need to recover, and it's really important for us. So we'll look at some of those tools and techniques that can help us with recovery. One of the magical things I think also about using Firstbeat Life is that it helps people see for themselves what gives them recovery. So this is the thing about green moments. All of us will already be getting green moments. So actually part of it is starting to notice what might be some of those activities and resources that help us get recovery. If we're already getting them, how can we start to notice them and use them more consciously to support our resilience? Then also to starting to think about what are our resilience resources. What are the things in our backpack? What are the things that support us? Because we'll have different tools and resources that will support us at different times. So for example, one of your resilience resources might be going for a run, or it might be going skiing, I suspect in Tiina's case. But if you're in the middle of a stressful meeting, you can't just get up and go for a run, but you might be able to use a short breathing practice, or you might be able to remember one of your core values. So thinking about the different resources and how they work at different times can be really valuable as well. One of the areas that I particularly focus on now more than ever is also our relationships, because we're just not built to do it by ourselves. So a question I often ask clients and also in workshops is, can you imagine being a cave person and having to hunt and gather food and defend yourself from predators, keep the fire going and look after, the young all by yourself? How successful would you have been? Probably not that successful. So we are wired for connection and we need each other. And there's lots of amazing research about that now. There's even the Harvard happiness study that looked at people over 80 years. And one of the things that they found was having some very good quality, close relationships at midlife helped to predict long-term health and well-being almost as much as how much we exercise, and also what our blood fat markers were. So it's really important. And one of the exercises I use with clients these days is to map our ecosystem of support. So who is in our ecosystem of support? Who are the people that we could ask for help? And really, this was inspired by speaking to one of my daughter's teachers, and she was talking about how she adopted 3 children. And when she was working with the agency, one of the things that they made her and her partner do is start to map their ecosystem of support, recognizing that what they were doing was actually something that was going to be really challenging. And actually, they were going to need other people to support them in this journey too. So we have a culture that really focuses on individualism, but actually it's something that we all would really benefit from thinking about, who's in our ecosystem of support, because we are quite literally not built to do it by ourselves. So we're going to cover, as I said, reflection and some recovery. some relationship, which is what Tiina also started to talk about, this idea of self-compassion, and also what some of our resilience resources might be, and why is that useful to support our clients with thinking about that. So as Tiina was saying, I'm going to invite you to take a moment and think about a friend who has been struggling and going through some challenge. So thinking about that friend, somebody that you really care about, how do you speak to them when they're going through difficulty and challenge? What kind of tone of voice do you use? And what sort of words do you say to them? So just taking a moment, imagining that your friend is going through some difficulty and challenge. How do you speak to them? What sort of tone of voice do you use? And what are some of the words that you might say to them? Now letting that go and thinking about yourself. So thinking about when you're going through some difficulty and challenge, how do you speak to yourself? What sort of tone of voice do you use? And what sort of things do you say to yourself? Is there a difference? So if you, like me, are somebody that speaks to themselves differently than they would to a friend, then the research suggests that we're not alone. According to the latest research, around 78% of us speak to ourselves in a way that we would never speak to somebody else. So we often think about all these things that might be causing us stress and activation externally, like joining late, for me, joining the Zoom late, IT challenges. But actually, the way that we speak to ourselves can be an internal stressor. That could be causing us some of that activation. And not all the activation that you see in Firstbeat Life is bad. There's positive stress and sometimes there's negative stress too. But the way that we speak to ourselves could be causing us some of that, using up some of our energy. So one question that we can work with is, hang on a minute, how am I speaking to myself? Is there a way that I could speak to myself as if I was speaking to a friend? And what might that be like? And certainly that could be something that's really useful for our clients too. So in the pandemic, I did a survey with many of the clients that I'd worked with in the past. And I said to them, what are two of the most useful things that we've talked about and worked on about resilience that's helped you in the pandemic? And the two things that people said most frequently was green moments and recovery. Thank you, Firstbeat Life. And this idea of self-compassion, because we're going to make mistakes, we're going to experience challenge, and not everything is always going to go right. Yes, so the research about the 78% is research that's been done by Kristen Neff. So she's one of the people behind something called Mindful Self-Compassion. And we can certainly share a paper about that because it's really, really useful. And I've definitely found it really useful. I work with a lot of people in healthcare here in the UK, in the NHS. This is something that's been really valuable in my experience. Oops. So then we have the resilience backpack, just to keep that thread coming through, and really inviting people, whether it's yourself, you could do this with family, doing it as a team, working with organizations, starting to get really clear and keep coming back to this question of what are the things in your resilience backpack? What are the things that support your resilience? Because there could be all sorts of different things, as you can see from this reflection tool. So there might be places. It could be your garden. It could be going for a walk to your local forest. So what are the places that support your resilience? And what I'd suggest about things like this kind of exercise is keep coming back to it, keep filling it out, keep adding things to it, because we might not remember everything all at once. What are the objects? So this can be one that is new for people, but are there things around you in your environment, on your desk, in your house, that when you start to think about them, have some meaning for you? Or are there things that you love? So starting to think about those and how might they be things that support your resilience. We've talked a little bit about people, but also many people belong to organizations like membership clubs, like sports clubs. So how are these things supporting our resilience as well as our activities? What are things that might give you green moments? It could be exercising as well. It could be doing something creative that you love. So it doesn't all have to be recovery moments, but what are things that top you up? So that might be new, thinking about what's in the resilience backpack, but in my experience, that can be really useful for people to share as well, so that we can learn from each other about things that support our resilience. So these are just some of the things that I completed myself as examples to give you some ideas. You can see that I've got my house plants. So if you came to my house, you would see that my house is a bit like a jungle. And I certainly know that my plants are something that support my resilience. They make me smile and I feel very happy about them. So this is the resilience backpack, and thinking about all your different tools and resources that go in your resilience backpack. So just taking a moment for you to think about for yourself, looking at that list, what might be something that you've got in your resilience backpack? Maybe it's something new that you hadn't thought of before, and what's it like to think about it? Who might you be able to share it with? This is another model that I have found really useful for clients to use as a reflection tool in the moment. And it works really nicely in my experience with Firstbeat Life. So there's a guy here in the UK called Professor Paul Gilbert at the University of Derby. And he has this model that he's developed called the 3 minds model. And this is really working on this idea that we have 3 different kinds of minds. On the left here, you can see that there's the blue mind, which is that kind of feeling like we're hunting, we're getting stuff done, we're finding stuff, we're getting through our list of stuff to do, we're excited, it feels good. Now, what that shows in our Firstbeat Life and our data, that would still be red. So we could call that kind of positive stress in some way. It's a higher heart rate and higher breathing rate, but it feels good. So that's blue. Then we've got red, which is that kind of more negative stress. So it's a higher heart rate, higher breathing rate, but it kind of feels more edgy. It feels a bit more like we're being hunted. And then we have the green, which fits very nicely with the Firstbeat Life data. That's our recovery or our green moments. That could be also when we're asleep, obviously, but that kind of calm, slower heart rate, slower breathing rate, higher heart rate variability, different hormones attached to that. So how can we use this as a tool to support our clients? First of all, colors work for people. So in that moment, helping people to use it as a practice. Where am I right now? What am I feeling right now? What we know from the research is that identifying the emotion that we're feeling in a moment can be really tricky because there's so many different emotions. But we could start to identify where we are, which mind we're in. So am I red right now? Am I blue right now? Or am I green right now? And where do I need to be? Because it could be that I'm feeling quite red, but actually what I need to be is either blue or green. So it just gives us a chance to reflect in the moment and get some data from ourselves very quickly. So just to remind us that when we're red in Firstbeat Life, that could be positive stress, that could be feeling like we're hunting and getting stuff done in just daily life, or some of that where you see the stress peaks, that could actually be feeling a little bit red, so this red mind. It can start to invite us to think about what do we need to do next to help us go green. So that's a model that I found really useful and that people can use in the moment. And this is just to show you a quick example of that in some data that I've seen with a client. So as Tiina was saying earlier, this is a typical day for somebody, seeing that kind of red at the beginning of the day. But the difference is when we hear clients talk about what their experience was, as well as when we see their data. So for this particular client, what he was saying was that it was a stressful morning. So he was in that red mind. And he was noticing he was feeling quite cross. He wanted to start shouting at people. He was working with his team and it wasn't going very well. He noticed he was red. So what he did was he took a moment. He stepped out of the room. He took some time to regulate himself. he reflected and reset. He said to himself, and this is what he said, you know, we're all human, we're in this together, we're a team, and we'll get through it. And you can see circled here that shift in his physiology. And actually, this is him later on going back in with his team and working with them. And you can just see that change for him. I wish that worked as well for me all the time. But really interesting example that we saw. And again, you know, sometimes it's looking at the data, but also hearing the client's story or them recognizing the story and seeing the data that can be really, really valuable as well. So am I red? Am I blue? Am I green? If I'm red, what can I do about it to help myself? And this is something that worked clearly very well in this instance. So what can we do in the moment if we're noticing that we're a bit red? One of the best ways is actually starting to change our breathing. So when we've got that higher heart rate, we also tend to have that higher breathing rate when we're feeling stressed, when we're feeling activated. So this is a practice we're going to do, a very short practice called a stop, reset, and prepare practice, or called Take 5. So what I'm going to invite you to do is just take a moment and put your feet very nicely on the floor and make sure you're sitting comfortably in your chair, making sure that your back is well supported. And just taking a moment, you might want to shut your eyes or you can keep them open. It's up to you. And just starting to notice your breath. So just starting to pay some attention to your breath and just starting to follow a nice even in breath. And that could be for the count of 4 or the count of 5, and a nice even out breath. Even in and then an even out. Maybe breathing in some green, maybe breathing out some red. So breathing in some green, so that's the calm, the slower heart rate. Breathing out some red, some activation. And then I'm just going to invite you for a moment to notice what it's like if you put your hand on your chest. Just taking a moment. So you might notice no change at all. You might notice the feeling of your hand, the pressure, the weight of your hand. You might notice the temperature. You might notice that your hand is warm or cold. Or you might notice nothing at all. Just taking a moment. And then a few gentle in and out breaths and then letting that go. So it's just inviting you to take a moment to notice, is anything different? Might not be. Or if there is, do you notice any change in your body or your breathing or how you feel at all? So why could this be a useful practice? Just to say, this is not a practice for everybody. So that's what's really useful, is having different tools in our toolbox, because one thing might work for somebody, but it might not work for somebody else. One reason why this might be a useful practice for people is when we change our breathing rate, actually that's going to change our heart rate. So when we start to slow our breathing down, that's going to start to help slow our heart rate down. And if we slow our heart rate down, that might just help reduce the level of activation a little bit. I'm not suggesting that it's going to make us instantly go into a green moment. That would be wonderful. But it might just take the activation down a little bit if that's not what we're needing right now. So this is, again, just some more examples from the data that I've seen. As you know, the red is activation, like Tiina said, but that could be because we're hunting, we're feeling good, or it could be because we're feeling under pressure, feeling a bit like we're being hunted. We don't know. And that's why it's really useful to ask clients what their experience is. And then the green is when we're going into that recovery or the parasympathetic side. So this is a client who was actually getting a lovely recovery moment before he went to bed. So we know that actually doing activities that help support that recovery before we go to sleep can be really valuable. And for this particular client in that moment, what he was doing was playing the piano. So doing something he enjoyed, doing something that took his focus, doing something creative is what was giving him that recovery moment potentially before he went to sleep. You can see that he got the kind of sleep that I wish I had. But what was also really interesting was that the next day he wanted to experiment what would happen if he did a breathing practice, a bit like the one that we've just practiced. And for him on that particular day, in the morning, just before starting, the working day, at the beginning of the working day, he did that short breathing practice. And you can see that gave him, in this instance, a lovely recovery moment at the beginning of that day. So the great thing about that sort of thing is you can do it anywhere, and you can even just do it for a minute and it might be something valuable. Now, one of the other things that we did in that practice was we put our hand on our heart a little bit, or sorry, put our hand on the center of our chest. Why might that be useful? Doesn't have to be that that was useful for you. Knowing something doesn't work for you can be as valuable sometimes as knowing something does. Interestingly, what we've found in some of the research is that putting our hand, touching, putting some touch onto ourselves, that can actually help with regulating our nervous system. So that could help with starting to get closer to that green. So it's a really interesting study where they activated people's stress response. So you can see that in this graph. They had one group where they didn't do anything at all, and one group also where they just placed their hand on their chest. And what they found was that there was actually a small drop in cortisol levels, even though people hadn't cognitively realized it. Just by doing that, that had actually helped people's cortisol levels to drop relatively quickly, or a small drop, but quite quickly. So this could be something that's really valuable. And I often say to clients, when you start to look around, you can start to notice that people are actually doing this sort of thing quite often all the time. So perhaps they're actually unconsciously trying to regulate their nervous system. And, maybe that's something that we're already doing, but we could start to use more consciously. So you can do that in a meeting, nobody's going to notice. You can do that on the bus, you can do that at home. So if that's something that was useful for you, how might you be able to use it more regularly? Another tool that can be really valuable for people is actually starting to use gratitude as a practice. So there's been a lot of research around a practice called 3 Good Things. You might be familiar with it, or it might be something completely new for you. What we know is that the brain is wired for threat. And that's really useful, because if we were going to get eaten by a predator, if that was a risk, it would be useful to think that there was always going to be a tiger behind every rock. But what we also know is that means that we're very sensitized to looking for the negative or looking for the threat, and we don't always notice the positive. Now, I caveat that because I don't believe in this positivity at all costs, or what we could call toxic positivity. It's not about pretending everything's okay when it's not. But what it could be like is just starting to expand our awareness, starting to notice, even if it's something really small, something that we're feeling grateful for. So if I was going to invite you to take a moment now and just start to think about what might be something really small that you're grateful for in this moment. Just started to think about what might be something really small that you're grateful for in this moment. So it could be having fresh water. It could be having a warm bed to sleep in. It could be having a pet. It could be family members. It could be health. So what might be something that you're feeling grateful for? And could this be something that either you use more for yourself, or could this be something that you use with your clients? Because what we know in terms of the research is starting to use a gratitude practice or taking a moment to be grateful. Again, that could be something that helps to create a green moment for us to help regulate our nervous system. So I was just going to show you a quick slide. And this was a client who, this is very lovely, here at the end of the evening or early evening, was putting his son to bed. And I said, what was it that gave you that recovery moment, do you think? And he said, I lie on the bed with my son every night and we talk about the things that we're grateful for. So we do the three good things practice, and you can see for him in that particular moment on that day, it might not be like that every day, that was giving him a lovely recovery moment. So how might you be able to use that? And I can see Tiina's here, so I think we must be nearly at time's up.
Yeah, I thought maybe we could have just a few minutes for chatting between ourselves, or if there is any questions. So I think that slide was a good one to end with too, because it kind of wrapped up the green moments. If somebody came in not knowing what green moments are, so that's what they are. And thanks for the good reflection. And I certainly felt I'm not wearing my Firstbeat Life right now, but I have my other kind of wearable device, and I could see this drop in stress levels from the pre-webinar prep to when you started. You have a very calming, soothing voice, so it was very enjoyable to listen to that, and good practices and good reminders for us. And for those who weren't so familiar with the red and green graphs before, it really, as Kate also highlighted, both colors are very, very normal and belong to life, and nothing to worry about if you are in the red when you're busy and active and doing things. But it is really useful to have a few tools in your toolkit that when you feel that stress level getting too high or too heavy, that you know what you can do to actually sort of force the nervous system to switch over to the parasympathetic side and your heart rate to slow down. And breathing is certainly, we've seen it lots of times, that that's one of the most powerful ways to actually cause that switch to happen.
Absolutely. And the thing that I would add to what you were saying, which is really valuable, Tiina, is practicing these things when we're not too activated, when it hasn't built up too much, is really useful, because we're building the muscle for being able to practice it when it has built up. Well, if we leave it to only practicing when it's built up, then that's when we can kind of get frustrated because it might not be working as well as we think it should. So practicing all of those things in daily life, not just when we're going through periods of stress, can be really valuable.
Absolutely, and prioritizing some time for that, because we get busy so easily. And I, like, for example, with myself, I really had to work on breathing for quite a while before I started to find a way that works for me, because there is different kind of breathing exercises. There's many apps that suggest you to do breathe 4, hold 4, breathe out 4, hold 4, and sometimes it's 4 and 6 or 7 and 8, and not every method works for everyone, but it's worth experimenting and find out that what sort of a natural rhythm that you can follow, and that you can actually do that in a few minutes time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a couple of comments about the Firstbeat graph. One, let's just quickly take on them, because we did have a lot of people who were familiar with that. One was that I did my Firstbeat Life measurement, and my data was just nothing but red, hardly any recovery at all. So, should I see a doctor, or what should I consider? What's your recommendation? So I guess I would tend to say that I probably wouldn't send you to a doctor right away. I would at first sort of go through a checklist of sort of obvious things. Did you have alcohol during the measurement? Even if it wasn't big amounts, alcohol can have a really big negative effect on recovery. Did you do some kind of really heavy exercise during the measurement? Because that also, as positive as it is, it can keep the nervous system quite active. Did you have a cold or a fever or something like that? And I would probably recommend doing a second measurement in a few weeks' time, when you just consciously try to have, you don't need to lie in bed, but just try to consciously have one or two really sort of peaceful, normal days with no obvious stress factors, and see what it looks like after that. Because the app also gathers, when it gets more intelligence from your system when you have a few measurements. But then, of course, if after that it's no better at all you see is red and high heart rate and low heart rate variability, sometimes it is a good idea then to get a health check and make sure that there's not some kind of infection or blood pressure or something like that, for example, in the background. Good question. And then there was another one that just came, that why, when I think I'm having a great night, does my chart sometimes show blocks of red or stress? So the graph that Kate just showed, and maybe I'll bring back just before we end here. We'll go a couple of minutes over time since we started a little bit late too. But I'll go back to this slide here. Oops. So sometimes you might have red blocks in the middle of your green periods, and that can be, if it's just here and there a little bit, it can be, for example, a lively dream period. So when you're having a particularly lively REM dream cycle, that increases the heart rate, and it might show up as a red color. So if it just comes periodically, but it's mostly green, I'd say that it's nothing to worry about. Of course, it can also be, for example, getting up and going to the bathroom and then coming back to bed, and it might take a few minutes to start recovering again. It could be that after you have a very stressful day where your energy level is super high all the time and your nervous system is really active, that your body is processing that during the night. And that's probably the most common thing that we see when people have too much stress, too much going on, and not enough capacity to switch off and downshift sometimes. And then the body is actually working through all of that during the night. And that's where the practices that Kate talked about today can be really useful.
I also, a top tip, found asking clients whether they've got a dog on their bed or a cat for unexplained, unexplained red and overnight. I have found a couple of times that could be a dog on the bed or pain, actually, I think sometimes as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm guessing that could go both ways. I'm sure there's by some people who feel like that's their object that helps them, switch off. Good comments. Here is our contact information. You can see that here. And if you want to learn more about, there's a few questions about wanting to learn more about Firstbeat and how that can be used. So please contact us here. If you want to contact Kate for more questions or want to know more about her methods or are interested on getting her coaching, so feel free to contact her directly. And we also agreed to put a few of there was a question about research about self-talk versus talking to a friend, that percentage, so we can put that link in the thank you email so that you can have access to that research. But I think at that we are going to call it a day. We are a couple of minutes over time, but thanks. We had a really nice large group of people online. Thanks for your attention, and thanks, Kate, for coming and talking to us about resilience. And let's see if all of us here anyway, we can take a few of those practices to heart and try to make sure that we stay resilient in these next few months. It's not an easy time in the world because so many bad things are happening and the end of the year tends to be tough. So let's be self-compassionate and kind to ourselves, and remember to put that hand on the chest every once in a while and take a few deep breaths. So
amazing.
Thanks for joining. Thanks, Kate. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.